This series of a presentation is going to discuss service and maintenance of the average vacuum that we have. And this is very important if you want to have a warranty maintained from the manufacturer of the engine. The first thing let's talk about is filters. We are in a dirty, dusty environment and sometimes very hot. And this is very important to keep these filters maintained. The first thing we have is let's talk about the fuel filter. We put an inline fuel filter right here and on this unit. Now our other vacuums have them in different locations. Some are internal in the gas tank or the fuel tank. But what's important about this fuel filter is when we are filling this with gas in between fill-ups, there's usually dirt and dust laying around here. And when I remove this cap here and the wind is blowing and I get wind currents, it will blow that free dust and everything into the fuel tank, and it will get into our system, and it should get caught into here, but if not, it gets into our carburetor, and you'll notice the engine running very erratically. That's the first thing we go to, is contamination of fuel from fibers that get into that carburetor and cause havoc. It will cost you a few $100s to take this to a service center and have that all cleaned out. So it's very important that we keep this area clean. The second type of filter that we have that should be cleaned after every job because of the dirt and dust on the environment is taking the carburetor filter that cleans all that air going into the carburetor. This needs to be taken off and blown off and put back in place after every job. Okay, so that's important for the carburetor air filter. Now for the engine cooling filter, of our systems we put a intake filter on our cooling air. Now all of the cooling air for this engine is brought in through this area, and we want to catch it before it gets into around the cooling fins where it packs up, loads up on the engine and causes the engine to overheat. Okay, so we're going to have a special series on that when it comes to the cooling filter air. The last thing we want to talk about is the oil filter. We have an oil filter over here that gets removed and changed. We recommend every 50 hours due to the amount of dirt, contamination, and heat on these engines. If you want it to last a long time, change these filters more frequently than recommended by the manufacturer. We say every 50 hours with a synthetic oil. If we walk over to this side over here, you'll be able to see the area right here. There's a plug we can remove, and that drains the oil through this large hole here, and you can catch it in a pan below. So we'll change that oil, remove that, let it drain, put the plug back in, put a new oil filter on, and we'll be good to go. So it's a very easy type of maintenance to do. Okay, this is the last segment of the service and maintenance I want to make everyone aware of. Down here where I'm pointing with my finger, all of our units have an hour RPM meter. Now this is important for two reasons. The hour meter is used for service and maintenance and when to do oil changes. Okay, the second thing on the RPM is sometimes if the engine isn't running correctly, the carburetor needs cleaned, the throttle cable may slip or it's not fully in the tight position, and you're only getting a 32 or 3300 RPM, your production rate will significantly decrease on these things just by a few hundred RPM. So these units should always be running up around 3580 or 3600 RPM. So check your RPMs every once in a while, make sure that engine is running to its optimal capacity. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the battery. Now as we go around to the other side of the vacuum here, all these units that have electric starts have a small motorcycle lawn and garden type battery. They're 12 volt. If you leave the key on and or something else, your magneto isn't charging, your battery will go dead and you're stuck on a job site and your engine won't start. So if you got the strength to do this, there's a recoil on here as a backup to pull start this. But the other option is if you have jumper cables, you can jump off your vehicle battery if it's a 12 volt and jump off of this to get a start. But if you want to charge this battery properly, this has to be trickle charged over a 24-hour period from the appropriate kind of charger to get these things to hold the charge. You can't just put a 1 hour, 2 hour charge on these. It will not hold the charge long enough for it to doing that. If these things sit for long periods of time, the batteries will go dead. So you have to sometimes give it a boost charge every once in a while, let it sit overnight. The last thing when we talk about sitting for a while, the fuel tanks right here. Try not to let the fuel in these tanks sit more than 60 days. So the way our fuel is nowadays, the regular fuel, it starts breaking down. It gets gunky and gives you a lack of buildup in your carburetor. It just generally is poor on your engine. So you have to use some Sta-Bil in there or some kind of additive sometimes to make that fuel so every once in a while cleans your carburetor good. But don't let your fuel sit in these for long periods of time. If it is, just drain the fuel out, run it out of the engine carburetor if you're going to store it for long periods of time. So that ends our series on service and maintenance.